Let's go. I've got something special for you guys today. We've got Ben coming on and he's going to be talking all things survival and arena and the future of arena and where everything's going. And we've also got a pro player, ItsMartini, who's going to be helping me grill him. So how's it going, boys?
Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Doing great. Excited to talk about stuff.
The first thing I wanted to talk about, because obviously there's now like these new patch notes. Recently, you obviously gave Martini 1 ILV because he was the first to hit wave 40. The question is, do you think that wave 50 can now actually be hit, especially with the nerfs, right? And are you giving another prize for that?
Yeah, go for it. All right, yeah. Go on, hit 50. I'll give an ILV to whoever gets there first. I don't think you can do it.
I don't think it's super doable. Martini thinks. Well, I'll let Martini say what he thinks.
You think it's doable?
I think it's pretty unlikely, actually. Like, maybe given the perfect deck, right?
Maybe in a perfect storm. But today we're mainly going to be covering the arena. So just to get into private beta 2 and we wanted to first kick it off with the hyper system. The dominant system essentially, and we just wanted to get some extra insight into what you guys have planned for it, because obviously the way that it's currently is hashtag like dog shit a little bit. So what is what is the plan for that?
So hyper's an interesting one, right? It's completely new, it's completely unique to us as far as I'm aware, right? It's something somewhat tried and untested, so there are going to be some rough patches with it. To speak to its long-term goals, by and large it's a tool focused on creating counterplay, creating reaction between player and opponent. And it's meant to be sort of a high skill thing that the players don't necessarily use when you're starting with. It's definitely not going to be in the first match of the tutorial or anything like that. By and large, it's something that you can build towards, but you can safely ignore at the beginning because there's enough to think about, right? It's an extra thing. By and large, it's aimed at increasing the value on the outcome based on player skill. So to qualify that perhaps a bit better is there's an age-old problem in the internet age, shall we say, which is that there's a problem with games, which is that they tend to become solved, right? And particularly in deck builders and so on, so much of it is I'm going to go to a website, I'm going to Google based on what the top players are saying, and they're using data analysis and so on, and I'm going to do one of three things, right? And those are the three things. And if I can't do those three things, sure, I can play them better, I can use these decks better, and so on. But by and large, a huge amount of the actual interest of the game is lost because of that. So our counter system is aimed at, by and large, moving more of that into the gameplay thing and stopping the prevalence of this is a solved puzzle, right? Because realistically, the way the hyper system works, because it is so about giving power to people that are competing against other people. If you're seeing a lot of net decking and you're seeing a lot of people, the fire rogue comp is the strongest deck in the meta, and you're seeing huge levels of play. Well, actually, the fact that is overperforming perhaps in the player perception, the counter system, in theory, allows us to naturally push back. We're gamifying that reaction to stop that net decking. Now, whether or not it's in its best state implemented, I'd say no. It needs quite a bit of love, but we're in a beta, right? And we're doing something very new and experimental. So there's bound to be problems, and hey, it's a beta. So even if there isn't going to be a problem, there's going to be a problem. I mean, it's in a tough spot right now. I do appreciate, and I have heard the feedback that people have said, it's less good than the version in PB1. I'm not sure I agree with that, at least from my perspective. Perhaps from the top end player perspective it is, but from a new player perspective, I think it's still better, it's easier. With that being said, obviously right now you're fighting the UI. Like the data, realistically, you're making decisions based on what you're seeing in front of you, but what you're seeing in front of you doesn't contain the information that you need to actually use the hyper system effectively. If you want to work out how hyper system works, you need to go read patch notes. So you need to read a comment made by myself or Aaron in Discord, which is ridiculous, right? That's not acceptable long term. It's a byproduct of the fact it's in a beta, so it will be addressed, and we'll see where it goes. For me, at least, my thinking is the system is better as is for the complexity point of view. Perhaps not at the top end, but the first step before we make any sort of more sweeping changes to the underlying system is I want to get the UI updated so the players can be informed, and we can facilitate their use of hyper first, and then we'll reassess and see where it goes from there.
Just a quick follow-up: the dominant synergy synergies. So we know the dominant synergies affect bonding with the ranger, which is only for us right now, not for the opponent, and then how the hyper interactions work. Is there anything else with the dominant synergies that's planned beyond those two things?
Not in the short term. There's some stuff that we haven't talked about yet, which I won't be leaking. For the time being, bonding, hyper, and obviously the overworld and the collection aspect obviously plays very heavily into it, because that's what makes them. But yeah, there's some stuff going on, but nothing right now.
And when it comes to what is the dominant, etc., when it comes to like fusing, or also the fact that apparently when you play an Ascendant Arena, you could play a Ramfy and use it as a Ramfire. Like, which dominant does that then receive? Will it always receive the same, or does it have an embedded, almost like a vestigial dominant? That might have been the weirdest way to phrase that, if you know what I mean.
It sort of depends, really. So the way it works with the base characters is that everyone has one, right? So every NFT you own will have a dominant for class, dominant for affinity. Right now, I'm leaning towards you can customize it in the competitive mode, but you can't in Leviathan, and you can choose between it. Whether or not that be the case, to be quite frank, it's largely there's two things, right? There's number one, I want you to feel that this is my NFT and it's unique. Right, so there is very much value for us in the collectible aspect, and we want you to know that, hey, this is my Ramfire or Ramfy, and it has this setup. But it comes down to the data and the number crunching by and large. What we don't want to do is, with our ranked being so focused, ascendant, on being a really rock solid gameplay experience, right? Our goal with it isn't to charge you, you're not going to spend $10,000 to be able to play this game, right? It's meant to be easy to access so that we can have mainstream appeal, right? The game is a fantastic market, they're really passionate, and that's the heart of our game, right? Realistically, our auto battle is very, very centered on let's make the best gameplay experience possible, right? Our overworld, because of how it works, obviously is by and large where we monetize and where we make our money and how we keep the lights on. So that's obviously really important. But at the same time, our auto battle, that actually frees us, right? Because rather than thinking, oh, can we give you these characters? Can we do this? Can we do that? By and large, a lot of it is just let's make the best experience possible.
So obviously it's easier to play if you can just choose which dominant you want it to be within ranked, but then it also adds another layer of, well, I actually need to have multiple Ramphys if you need like the two different kinds of dominant, or I guess even three potential.
You wouldn't Ramfy in your example wouldn't have another dominant, right? Ramfy
for the class.
No,
if you're playing it as a higher stage,
if you're playing it as a
or the Scion version,
if you're playing as a Ramfire,
but every Ramfy will have the same dominance, right? Because they only have two things, right? They're fighter, they're rogue fire, right? So they're always going to be all Ramphys are going to be the same, right? Now, when you fuse them up, or when you capture Ram fight, that's when there's some variety and some change, right?
But then if say I have a Ramfy, I want to play it in Ascended as Ramfire, will it have an underlying, almost attached like class dominant that it then has to, or I guess we'll find out, depends on.
So it always will, it will.
Yeah.
But the question still remains is whether we have it be the player selects it when they're making the deck, or whether we say no, you can't select it. This is just one thing that say, hey, you want to get the other side of the coin, you have to have the higher thing. Don't know yet. You still needs to go through the process.
Next topic I was hoping to talk about is augments. So kind of how you guys feel about them in the beta right now, where you see them going, if you think you're planning on adding more, just tweaking the ones that we have, anything around that topic.
So more to be added in the form of legendary augments. No plans to add new lines in the base augments for the time being. Generally, because of the way that the augments are designed, they tend to be reactionary and they're there to solve problems. We will add them longer term. That absolutely will happen. And there'll come a point, particularly with the Ascendant, when we get into the gameplay and the feedback from that. I think there's likely to be feedback that says, hey, we need more things to deal with healing, or we need more tools to deal with energy damage, or things like that. So there will be some reactionary aspects to it, right, which will come about through the next betas and so on. On the balance state of them, overtuned as hell right now. We are aware of it. They will be readjusted again. We were planning on, we had a sort of an internal patch between the first one and the second one that you guys have seen, in which we halved the amount of value gained from flex stats. So if you were getting 10, now you're getting 5 from a stat. That seemed to go all right, but some people did feel that there was it was too much, so we might need to be a bit more nuanced in it. It's an interesting challenge with our augments, right? Because sort of explain the design of the augments, right? The augments, in speaking in very broad game design terms here, each character has a number of roles it fulfills, right? There's dozens of roles if you list them out. If you want to go into sub roles and so on, you can end up with hundreds. But you have flankers, you have DPSs, you have damage absorptions, you have buffers, debuffers, CC, all these things. So by and large, one of the interesting things in an auto battle is that characters, because you don't have control over them other than their positioning, they do the same thing, right? A Ramfire is never going to be a tank by his base stats, right? If all goes to plan. Now, that's a problem in some senses because it means that you can only use them a set amount, right? Whereas that's when augments come in. Augments allow you to both modify the kits of them so they do different things and they can achieve different things, and they're a tool by which you can deal with things, right? So you, generally speaking, a character does one thing whereas an augment can do multiple things, right? So you can use them to address problems that you see. So to get back onto the sort of the point of the balance of them is that there has to be an amount of power. So right, there's a cost, which is the mastery points. Then if you weigh them up, you have a balance from the power from their ability and power from their flex stats, right? And that's their total sum power. And from an excitement and interest point of view, almost all of that interest comes from the ability. The raw stats, they're useful, they're tall, but they don't add excitement by and large, right? Their stats are fundamental parts of the characters. Those are the stats you're gaining. We're not letting you suddenly gain, weird stats, right? Shall we say, let's say we don't let you get energy regen, right? We can't let you stack a bunch of energy regen on a character because that's a sort of advanced stat rather than one of our base ones. So the balance perspective is that, hey, it's very easy for us to adjust flex stats. It's literally couple of lines, very straightforward, they're shared. And for me at least, from my perspective, is I want most of the power to come from the abilities because that's the interest point. But the caveat obviously is that stats let you do things and they're very easy to understand, right? I put health, I'm now at a tank. Right now, it might not make me a tank as a role, but it makes me tankier, right? It pushes the boundaries. So from a complexity point of view, which is an area where I think the auto battle is probably overachieving, it's too complex right now. It's a great tool for new players, right? Because it's very easy to understand, attack speed makes me attack faster. Health makes me think. Whereas if you have, debuffs grit in an area around me, that's a far more nuanced thing to understand from a player perspective. So it's a bit of a balance, right? Which is that we want to keep the abilities integral. They need to be the heart of them. Also, at the same time, we need to facilitate the use of these augments, and particularly in survival mode where you have a fixed amount of augments, right? It's not like ranked where you could, in theory, take 5 characters in and 25 augments or something along those lines. You have a fixed amount, right? And when you're getting into the higher mastery point costs of survival at the top waves, where you're, by and large, if you've played well and you've used interest well, you'll have more mastery points than you probably ever will in ranked. The result is that you can always use augments more effectively, right? Because you have a limit to how many characters you can have on the board, but that limit is far higher with augments because if you have 8 characters on the board, I can have 16 augments, right? So you can feel the power, particularly at higher levels. Augments then become a deciding factor in that total power, because if I'm limited to 8 Illuvials, but I've got 16 augments, then I can use those augments become more. So it's an interesting one because it's, as I have said in the past, actually, we're not balancing towards survival mode right now. Like, we do balance a bit towards it, we sort of nod towards it, but longer term, we balance towards ranked and our PvP modes. That's the heart of our games. That's what really matters from a balance perspective. And to some degree, so for example, give you the example of Ramfire. Ramfire is broken as hell in survival mode from a base mechanic perspective because you can see the enemy, right? So you can hit all of it, and best of all, they have extra units, right? They have up to 12 units in survival. So something can do AoE damage applied to lots of units, and then you can see those Illuvials. Pterodactyl's bonk was broken, right? Bonk was broken. So he's been adjusted a bit for that. So realistically, when PvP comes out, probably people are going to go, Ramfire's useless. And realistically, we're going to have to buff them, and then people who play survival are going to say, Ramfire's the best character in survival. And depending on your perspective, that means, bad things. But at the same time, that's the only way to deal with it, right? Realistically, balance towards PvP, because that's the heart of our mode. Right now, you have survival. We don't care so much about the balance, and the time investment required to get the balance right is significant, right? So we don't do it. We focus on getting the game out there rather than polishing something that doesn't necessarily matter too much to us. Within reason. We don't want to make it miserable. If the character is one-shotting every character, balance is broken, but it's also just ruining the entire purpose. It's dominating the experience.
So survival is ultimately as balanced as PvP, as in everything's balanced for PvP. And then when it's used in survival, just because you can see the enemy board, a lot of stuff is therefore broken just because like as you said with Ramfire. So whatever the balancing is in PvP, it's just gonna be those same stats will just be used for survival, right?
Yeah. I absolutely refuse to have two sets of balance because one is double the work and then it creates confusion.
It's confusing as well, yeah.
Yeah.
And then they can actually just play against a board and be like, well, this is what would happen if I could see. And then they better practice for being able to play in PvP, which is the point, yeah.
And the other side of it is survival is intended to be our friendly beginner mode, right? We don't require you to own NFTs. If you have just heard of this amazing game called Illuvium, you've checked out and you thought, oh, holy hell, this looks good. Oh, it's crypto. Oh, I've heard bad things about crypto games. I don't really use crypto and I'm scared of it, or whatever reason you have, play survival. You can come in and you can experience a fully fledged, decent game, enjoyable experience without spending a dime, right? And it's a fantastic tool for our onboarding as a result, right? Because free games, who doesn't love them?
So you could come on, play Overworld, experience tier zeros, get into that and be like, oh, I'm not even sure if it's worth going any further. And then it's like, well, I can play survival, check out what it feels like, and be like, oh shit, I want some of this,
So this is what Ramfire does.
And when it comes to new Illuvials, is there plans to end up testing all of them in the private beta? Like, are we eventually going to continuously just get more and more Illuvials? Or are there some Illuvials that will be tested in secret and released upon game launch?
It's a good question. For me, right now, you're going to get them all over time because that's what I care about more. I care about getting the balance right, and it is nuanced and complex, so I'd rather test with them. I don't think there's been a discussion about it, so I might get an angry PM from Kieran if he ever watches this saying, "Oi Ben, no, we're not leaking this." But I believe right now the plan is all characters out over the betas. Obviously, there's private betas, and then there's the open beta before we go to full release.
Yeah, and just on the new patch that we've had a day or two ago, just in your opinion, what are the main highlights? If somebody's just plays every once in a while, what are the main highlights for them that will change their experience of private beta 2?
I think probably the interest change is the largest one. I think that's the big boy. Other than that, it's a relatively minor patch. It's not a big deal patch. It's addressing the biggest problems. So that was primarily Crystal Shrimp and Steam. Those are the two big ones I took away from it. There'll be more coming, but by and large, it's a fairly minor patch. It's there to help hopefully the most problematic encounters.
I gotta say, I think as a minor patch with just a couple numerical tweaks, I think it's a great patch in the right direction, right? Just toning down the top end a little bit, and that's about it. So I think small tweaks like this are great to do frequent patches. On that topic, do you guys have a patch cadence planned where maybe every week or every 2 weeks, every month? Or are you thinking just kind of play it by ear when you think things need adjusting or you want to test something new, you'll plan on getting it out?
Yeah, I mean, sooner is better from the player perspective and somewhat for our perspective. Obviously, it just comes down to time, right? It takes time to write patch notes, it takes time to push change. By and large, it's time is money, and we're pushing to bigger picture stuff. So generally speaking, when needed is probably how it's going to be. I don't really want to commit to 2 weeks because I'd rather not put the work in for something that doesn't really change very much. So basically, when it's needed, sooner is better. So I can absolutely foresee every 2 weeks there being changes. I'm not going to commit to it. It's just when we need to do them, we'll do them.
Awesome. I also have to say that speaking about anything that we dislike, it's always we are really happy and grateful that you guys did give us the beta in the current form and you didn't wait an extra month or two to polish a few extra things. Please give us unfinished stuff as sooner rather than later. We're even if you hear the community complain, we're happy inside that we got something, I promise.
That's what you say until you see the monstrosities that we make partway through, and then you go, "Oh, it's ruined the game."
Yeah, if you put the 3 monkeys in the game, the gorillas, and they're just purple cubes and there's no art, but we get to use them, I'm happy.
We were actually, myself and Aaron have talked about this in the past. At one point, we were telling the art team we were going to just put every character in the game with their abilities alone, and some of them will be boxes.
Yes, it's
but Grant is quite scary, and he does box. And I don't know, I'm not near him, but if I came near him after doing that to his game,
I still think that we'd accept it though. It's a beta, like, for crying out loud.
No. I'll explain Grant to you. Right? I've literally had him call me, right, at like 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm literally half asleep in bed, and he's like, "Yo, bro, check this out." And I'm looking at my phone, going, "Why are you bothering me?" And I pick up the phone, and he streams to me, "Check out what I've just done." And he's streaming me, something he's done on the Overworld, and it's gorgeous, always fantastic. But I go, how many FPS is that? And it's because he's got RTX on, he's got ray tracing, and he's playing the game at 5 FPS. And he will do that for hours, right? And I've never seen a human being play a game at 5 FPS and be happy, but he does it joyously because he's looking for different things. So, and at the end of the day, he is the boss. So if I do that, he might kill me.
5 trillion triangles in a single rock, something like that, right? To make it look just
we did have a 200 gigabyte rock for a while.
What does that even mean?
What that means is Aaron hits the roof and goes, "Why are we paying so much money? Why is everyone downloading? What's going on?"
On the topic of survival, I wanted to push a little further with that and kind of where the vision is of that going. So we talked about survival, people being able to play for free and have a deck given to them. Are there other versions of survival that are kind of in the works, at least design-wise? Like maybe a version where people bring their own deck in, or a roguelike version where you build a deck as you play through. Have these been considered at all?
So interestingly, the roguelike version is the original version, right? So when I originally designed survival mode, I made 5 different versions of it, right? And there was like a sort of a version 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and it was idea being, I don't know if you recall back when we started in doing survival last year, the goal was get something out quickly to the community. So it was sort of, okay, let's get this done quickly, and then have a foundation we can build upon to build the finalized mode. So survival mode is intended longer term to be this roguelike thing where you create your deck, right? So at the start of the day, rather than being handed a deck, you'll be presented with X options in X categories. And you'll say, okay, of the 3 augments, I'm going to take this one. And of the 16 characters, I'm going to take these 4 characters. And of the 3 stage 3s I'm offered, I'm going to take that 1 character. Then after each round, then you make other choices, right? Do I want to upgrade a character in my deck, increase their stage? Do I want to take a new character and add it to my deck? That sort of stuff. From each round, you're making a decision afterwards. And I'm still incredibly attached to that as a design. I think that's really exciting and really fun, and not an insane amount of work for the payoff. So that's on the tables, still on the table, still in my plan. Aaron might disagree with me, but I think I've got him on it. So eventually, but obviously right now PvP is our next big focus, right?
Yeah, I think the roguelike version would just add a ton of replayability to the mode that's kind of intended to be a training mode on the side, but I think it could get a lot more attention as like a truly fun game mode to play, not just for the purpose of training. If you can get sort of a different experience every time as you go along.
Absolutely. I mean, the current survival mode is weirdly near to a puzzler at the top end, right? Like realistically, you're analyzing a problem with your deck being your solution, and you're going through. So it actually slows down the gameplay, and it's interesting, it's fun, but it's somewhat unique. It's actually one of these things that I would say isn't what I envisage actually happening. When I heard about people sharing screenshots and passing through levels via that, it was something that took me by surprise, and it probably shouldn't have, but yeah, it did at that point. But that, I think, will be very much addressed by the deck building aspect, right? Because right now, those somewhat, not necessarily negative, but somewhat problematic, shall we say, decisions that players are optimizing the game out of. There's a famous game design quote, players will optimize the fun out of their game, right? Like they will, and that's somewhat the nature of games, right? Because realistically, gamers tend to be fantastic problem solvers. Realistically, a game is a puzzle wrapped in a puzzle, and you're trying to chase, depending on your play style, you're trying to chase perfection, and you're optimizing out of it. So it's an interesting one, because it's the roguelike will somewhat stop that, right? Because rather than you being able to see your deck, and I'm sure Martini will say this, when he looks at a deck at the start of a new deck, you're looking at it and you're going, what's the strongest board with these characters that I've got here, right? And sure, you're optimizing parts of them to get around specific waves, but there is very much 1 or 2 central comps for that deck that day that are the most powerful, and sure, there'll be tweaks to get around certain waves with them, but that's, pretty quick about what you're going for, right? And whereas if you have it be, I'm building a deck as I go, that allows you to have, on wave 30, to have a completely different deck for someone else based on the decisions you've made. And that suddenly puts so much more value on the decisions, and it's much more fun of a learning experience, right? Because you don't yet know what you're going to get. Maybe round 15 hands you a Ramfire, right? But how do you play around that at that point? At that point, the correct gameplay, particularly, will be pivot, right? Rather, it'll be reactionary. It'll be, I'm doing this because of this. Oh, I've just received a stage 3 Axolotl. Holy cow, I can use that. I can build a comp around that. And I've got this that works well with it. Oh, okay, I can go in that direction. Something far closer to, say, Slay the Spire, right? Where you have emergent gameplay revolving from the randomness of what you get, right? It's sort of input randomness.
I think that's sick, bro. That's actually so exciting.
It sounds so fun. Also, you said stage 3 Axolotl. That is a unit.
It is a beast.
Even after the patch, that is a nice.
Yeah. Yeah, he might need to be kneecapped a little bit more, but he was spent so long not being very useful. I really like him being useful because he is one of the classic characters for us, right? Like, he does look awesome. He's cool. Axolotl is such a cool character. Like, have you seen Axolotl in any other game other than Pokemon ever?
I don't know. While we're talking about Illuvials, the T0s and the Lynxes, these are the new set of Illuvials in PV2 that we've gotten access to. I personally love them. I think the design is super cool. How I feel like the T0s and the Lynxes, they function in almost exactly the same way because you have all the combinations of primary affinities and classes. And it feels like they're super unique in that, like, all the natures have this kind of healing identity. All of the rogues obviously jump to the back line and have a damaging ability. And all the combinations kind of fit perfectly with what I would expect them to do. Like, you can have an empath with fire, so you get the healing from empath, but then some additional damage from fire. I just think the designs are super cool. Like, how are you guys feeling internally about the tier 0s and the Lynxes? Are you happy with the way they turned out? Community feedback, stuff like that?
Yeah, like, we're very happy. Aaron is incredibly smart. I literally got a call off with him today about them because obviously they were his brainchild, right? I don't know if you guys know this, but in the original 2D Illuvium back in the dawn of time, that was all Illuvials were following that format, right? They were all being, there was 25 lines all doing that exact same behavior. There was a fire version of this, and so he's very smug because he got vetoed on that. They said people said it was boring, but it's being very well received when we sort of introduced it on a lesser scale here. So yeah, really happy with them actually. They're meant to be sort of archetypal for their characters. They're meant to be simple and straightforward, but still have a purpose in the main deck. Particularly for the tier 0s, which are simple characters. They're not complex kits. They're not things. They do what that character should do. An empath should bolster its allies in an area, right? A bulwark should CC or damage or be tanky and so on. They all do exactly what they're meant to do, and they're still relevant, right? You still use them in high tier comps. Sure, you're not having a team of tier 0s, but that to me says we did a good job there because they're intended to be simple to learn. I don't really want to have any character in the game be useless. Like, I'm not viewing that as an acceptable design state, particularly because they're NFTs and people own them. For me, longer term, I don't agree with the idea that we're going to end up with a character that's just designed poorly and so you can't use it, right? You see that in some games, particularly strategy competitive games, whereby the underlying design and the balance of them is such that you can't balance them because their kits are so one-dimensional or cause problems in emergent in different ways that you can't use them. For me, at least, my approach is if that occurs, then it needs to be reworked, right? I don't want to end up with a character that's completely useless because we've had to nerf it to the ground to make it, to stop it ruining the game.
I'm curious actually because I've heard that TFT's notoriously hard to balance. They try every time and fail blissfully. How are you guys doing things differently from TFT? And what are the things that you as a game designer are actually considering when it comes to this? Because it kind of blows my mind.
So we have very, very strong parallels to TFT, but also at the same time, we're also weirdly very different in some areas, right? TFT is incredibly random derived, right? So by and large, if I talk about what I'd call perfect gameplay, right, for TFT, a lot of that gameplay is before the game has even started, which is understand the meta, understand how comps are built, and have X amount of comps in your head and know what are the strongest comps, right? Now, you could take that further and start talking about player knowledge and the fact that player knowledge is imperfect, and realistically, what everyone could be playing, if they're all playing the same thing because it's so broken, might be there's an even more broken thing out there, but they never discover it because they're all fighting to play the broken thing, right? There's some nuance there. But by and large, perfect gameplay in TFT is analyze the meta, work out what the X strongest comps are, and then depending on what random hands and what randomness occurs, build towards one of them, right? And it's a problem for them somewhat because of the fact they're against 8 people, right? So if you're against 8 people, you can't counter someone's behavior as easily because you don't know if you're against them. And it's a problem, which is that just makes it, rather than saying, oh, this is incredibly strong, but I'm going to do this to defeat it, you can't do that, because if this to defeat it, whatever team, whatever structure that takes, isn't strong in the meta, then you can beat the person that's going to win as many times as you want. If you lose to the other 6 people, it's irrelevant, right? So for us, it's also it's interesting because we don't have the output randomness that the TFT is literally built around, and instead, because PvP, which is what we're going to balance around, is player controlled with some from legendary augments and so on, but by and large, majority of what's going to occur is going to be as a result of your own actions. You're going to bring in your deck, you're going to use your NFTs, and there's going to be an outcome. So that changes things quite heavily, right? Because the structure completely changes. Sure, there's now the analysis of what's strong, but because you're playing against one person, what's strong is likely to be what's flexible, because realistically countering and so on exists and positioning exists. TFT, you can't balance, if you've got a comp that's a backliner and you need to have a frontliner at the front and you're against rogues or assassins, well, you lose that match most of the time because you don't know when it's going to occur. And in a 1v1 situation at the end, then the rogues lose because you just stack up your things in the corner and they can't do their rogue job, right? So and they have to balance for all of that. So they have to balance for that game state at the end, whereby it's a one-on-one, and then they have to balance for the intermediary steps, whereby you don't know what you're against. And that means that they can't ever get balance right, realistically, because there's always going to be a problem.
Yeah, TFT is very proactive. Like, I would say at least 90% proactive strategy, maybe even more than 90%, where you don't care too much about the specifics of what opponents are doing. You can generally look at the strength of enemy boards and say, okay, I don't need to spend my gold now. I'm already strong enough to win, things like that. But for the most part, you're just kind of doing your own thing, trying to make your board as strong as possible, and not necessarily better specifically than an opponent's board, where the 1v1 nature that we hope to get sometime soon of Illuvium, it's more about being better than your opponent, not just being good.
Yeah. And like reacting to them, because you made a very good point there, Ben. I hadn't considered it that way, but literally in TFT, because you have to play against multiple people, it just it's almost impossible to balance, actually, just from that side as well, actually. That makes a ton of sense. When it comes to PvP in Illuvium, though, how far along are we at the moment? What progress has been done? How many different varieties of PvP mechanics have you guys sort of come up with? Because I'm assuming, because we don't even know what is going to be, like, how exactly is PvP even going to work. I'm assuming you guys are trialing different variations. Yeah, how's that looking at the moment?
This is one I'll say I'm not going to speak too much on. We're turning attention to it now, right? Realistically, the dev team and the design team has been focused on survival up until now. Now we're pivoting to work on the PvP side. PvP side, there's a bunch of stuff that's designed. It's mostly designed at this point, but obviously it's designed without enough testing, right? The proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say, so we need to get our hands on it and play it. So that's what the dev team is going to focus on next, and then the structure will evolve from that, right? We're aware of what our tools are. We've got an idea as to what we want to do. Myself and Aaron spent far too much time arguing about what we think is better. So we'll now be just, who's right and who's wrong when we get to get in there and play, which hasn't yet properly started. It has happened to a lesser extent, but it's the next big push internally for us.
So it's being pushed now. And something you mentioned earlier, which I don't think I've heard of before. You actually mentioned legendary augments. What is a legendary augment?
They've definitely been leaked.
Have they been leaked? Maybe I'm just ignorant. Wait, Martini, have you heard of legendary augments before?
In passing a few times, yeah.
Okay.
This is the thing that you talked about before, Ben, with where it's like a shared augment that both players have access to, and there's potentially some sort of bidding and how much you want to buy it for.
Exactly.
Whoever bids the highest gets it and gets to
right.
play it in their deck, but they have to pay for it. Pay for it via mastery points, right? So not like actually.
Like a sacrifice
Well,
of
no
mastery
longer
points.
mastery points, probably. That was the original design, mastery points bidding on it. But
Maybe not
I
mastery
think
points.
you're correct from what I probably leaked at some point, but it's too much complexity, I think, at this point. So I'm probably just
so
like
some
a
other
secondary
form of
resource.
sacrifice. Maybe it's your health
Exactly.
total or something else that makes you weaker, but you get access to a potentially very powerful augment that's like game altering, I guess. We don't really know any of the specifics, but it sounds like maybe you can't share any details
I
about
can
the
share
augments themselves.
I'm not going to give you any specifics, but I can sort of share the line philosophy for them changes, right? So augments themselves, because you're bringing them in, we don't want them to be brainless. There's no intention for you to say you must play this augment on this character, and that character be balanced around that thing, right? So I'd to give TFT an example, they have a bunch of items that their game is fundamentally balanced around. Blue buff, Shojin, all their literal mana totals are balanced around those two items existing, right? And that's a fundamental aspect of their game that they are utterly balanced around. And if you don't get those, great, you lose, right? And I'm very pleased to see them adding treasure dragons and so on in the latest set to be able to brute force RNGs to an extent and remove. There's a Wardog does a wonderful little talk about where he talks about how they're very dependent on RNG, but a lot of his job is actually just taking the edges off it, taking off the edges of the worst case of RNG, which I think is absolutely spot on. So for us, augments, because you bring them in and because there isn't RNG in towards their creation, we don't want them to be binary. We don't want them to be, okay, well, I'm playing a Ramfire, so I'm going to use, perpetual entropy every single time. And if you don't have that, then you're not playing Ramfire right, and he's going to be worse for it. That to me is boring. That's a solved puzzle. It's boring. It's brainless, and it's also sort of it's somewhat of a punishment to new players in the sense that if there's a solved solution that you don't yet know, but everyone does, and the game is balanced around, it's a problem. Whereas I would say on the legendary augment side, that changes things. Because you don't take control of bringing them into the battle, we can push the boundaries on them, right? So we can make things like blue buff, we can push the identities so that they can be, holy cow, I wish I could have this on my pangolin, it's amazing, right? And if I see it and I've got pangolin comp, I bet the bank on it, right? I go for it. That's cool, that's exciting, that's interesting. And because there's bidding and so on, there's counterplay for it, right? Because the player has knowledge as to what the other person is doing, because they've seen parts of their deck, and because, hey, we've got legendary bidding during the gameplay potentially, when it goes out, you can say, oh my god, this guy has this magma comp, and he hasn't got an augment hasn't got this augment yet, but I've just seen it in the legendary pool. I'm bidding everything to stop him getting that, and I think I can beat him because of it. Right? That's really good reaction, counterplay, thought process, and it takes the power of the player's hands to some degree. One of the big problems you have towards repetitive games is that because they're always the same, right? Hearthstone, for example, or, card games, you've got RNG playing a role, but by and large you play with the same stuff. So the perfect play to take your deck always remains the same almost. Sure, you react to your opponent, sure, there's all this other stuff, but there's a problem, which is that you can get a bit bored of it. And what we want there to be is to be an excitement. I want you to go into the match and go, holy cow, what if I finally see it? And then every so often, once in a blue moon, you get the perfect augments, your opponent screws up, you get them, and you get to make the god Ramfire comp. And he takes the skies and he wipes the entire board, right? And you have that moment of, whoa, that's my power fantasy, right?
So I have a thought actually about these legendary augments. I don't know if this is anywhere in the design, but right now you're talking about augments being equipped or attached to specific units to empower them. I think something cool would be like for PvP, it sounds like it's going to be a game of partial information, guessing what your opponent's going to do next given somewhat what they're doing. I think a neat legendary augment would be something like you gain one extra piece of information, whatever that may be, so a little bit more about what they're doing, rather than like saying empower this unit to be stronger. Maybe my comp is very like single target focused. I have a lot of CC around stopping one unit, and if I had a little bit more information about what the opponent was doing, that could give me an edge. So I don't know if that fits into the design of legendary augments, but something more subtle than just make this unit strong, I think would be really cool to incorporate into the game.
Yeah, yeah,
Just to
I
throw that
absolutely
out
agree.
there.
There's a whole bunch of really cool stuff that we can play with. Like our game modes are sandboxy, right? We're data driven and so on, so we can push modes out. Like I was literally talking to Aaron about this earlier. We don't need to limit ourselves to thinking, oh, we're only going to have 3 modes or 4 modes, right? Realistically, all the characters will work in lots of modes, and we can do them fairly straightforward, right? For the amount of enjoyment we can get, so we can push the boundaries and we can experiment as well. We can have a season where there's board effects and certain parts of the board do different things, or we can have seasons whereby you can have entire team-wide effects. All of those sort of things are potentially on the cards longer term, and it will be part of the process of our betas and so forth to test those things out, and our community discourse. One thing I do think we do quite well is we're a DAO, and that I do try and listen. I don't necessarily agree, and sometimes, but I would say that that's the exact sort of stuff that we're looking to do, right? We want this to be an experience whereby you think, holy cow, I own ILV, I own my little portion of this game, and when I want to make a suggestion, I get heard. Now, you might get told you're an idiot, but you do get heard at least.
I was also wondering, by the way, after your interview with Artemis, I think that Kieran mentioned that when Overworld Beta does come out, that then you guys just can't release it to everyone that has private beta right now, just because that's just too many people. I was wondering, will you guys be doing some kind of like analysis of who actually plays private beta the most at the moment, like maybe the 100 or like 500 people that actually consistently play the most, potentially like not whitelisting them, but giving them access to the overworld, as well as they're clearly like some of the more active people in the community that are super interested in playing the game. Is there going to be anything like that, or is it going to be some kind of random draw? Because I know that there was a lot of like just pissed off people that felt really part of the community, and when private beta came out, and like they didn't get it for like a few weeks or a month before other people, and there was a bit of like jealousy.
I mean, I think to some extent, jealousy is what you want, right? Like realistically, we want people to go, holy shit, let me in your game, bang on the walls, right? Like, because to some extent that builds hype. Now, I would make the case, for me in betas, there's an aspect of why are you doing a beta, right? And depending on different teams and different things. So marketing, they don't care about the balance or anything that I'm doing. They probably care that I'm happy and so on. But by and large, they have different goals for me, right? So marketing probably cares really a lot about content creation, cares about feedback and good headlines and so on. Whereas I probably care a lot less than that about that sort of stuff. So there's that aspect. So for me at least, and this from my perspective, I don't really care about if you're playing the game a lot. I care about whether you're giving feedback or not. Now, whether you're giving feedback I agree with, it doesn't really matter. It's more just voices, right? So I would say, by and large, people I'll personally get in are the people that are giving me feedback and they're giving me relevant information and that I can work with, right? Because even if you spend 1,000 hours, you're spending 1,000 hours silently, that's doing me very little good. Like realistically, sure, you're probably part of some data set, which I'm probably using in some way, shape or form. But I'd rather have someone who's vocal. So, I mean, it depends. Like, there's an aspect of it which is like, number one, you've got to bear in mind, is it good enough, right? You only get one chance at a first impression, right? So if someone's making content and it's going out there and we're not happy with it, then that's potentially a negative, right? Like, depending on your perspective, depending on the game state. So it sort of depends on what we're going for. Because, to be quite frank, from a game design perspective, from my very selfish viewpoint and not as part of the team, I don't care about that sort of stuff. I care about feedback and data and how the player feels and whether my assumptions are correct. By and large, when you're designing something, you make assumptions as to how people are going to play, how they're going to experience, and so on. And you're frequently surprised, right? Like, not frequently, but it's not once in a blue moon, right? Regularly, players will take you by surprise as a game design. So for me, selfishly, I'd say I don't care about the some aspects of it, and I really care about other aspects. So yeah, for me, I vote for people who will give me feedback, even if it is negative.
Well, I hope and think that you might receive some extra bug reports once this video comes out.
But yeah, that's probably how it works. Like QA will go, okay, who gave us the most bug reports, and they'll they'll get some people in. I'll get some people in who I feel will give good feedback, and then there'll be the usual stuff, which will be, algorithm driven, right? Whether or not they've got a PC capable of playing the specs, that sort of stuff.
And just before we wrap it up, I've realized I'm actually completely ignorant on one last question, which is how do you actually in the game get augments? Do you like craft them? Do you find them in the overworld? You craft them with resources found in the overworld?
Craft them with essence found in overworld from
Right. That makes sense. And
then those will be tradable as well on the marketplace. I mean, those will be NFTs that you can trade, sell, buy.
Yep, cool. Exactly. They're the primary source of value from the plants, basically. Plants give you consumables, which you use, and they're not meant to be value driven. You're meant to be just use them to advantages in the overworld. Tough fight, heal your character, that sort of stuff.
So plants equals augments, rocks equals ranger gear, roughly speaking.
Equipment, yeah.
Okay. I have one final question as well in the auto battler that I forgot to ask. Can we have multiple of the same Illuvial in a deck?
Yep.
So my double Ramfire, double Titanor deck is allowed?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to check. Wait, I shouldn't have said that.
I mean, I don't know how playable that is though. Like, that's a lot of mastery points just to get that on the board.
I mean, it's just 4 units, you're done. That's the whole deck.
It's true. And augment it up. Okay, well, do you have any closing notes, Ben? Anything you want to say to the community?
So I like your pink hair.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate you coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. If anybody wants to find more of Ben, he sometimes responds in the Discord. He'll definitely be.
Do not DM me. I'm not your friend. Just
don't
DM
tag
me.
him or DM him, but do follow him on Twitter, which you can find the link to in the description.
I don't have Twitter.
You don't have Twitter?
Me. No, just message me in a channel. Don't bother me.
You don't have Twitter?
Don't have Twitter, don't have Instagram. You ain't
in this space.
Me.
I'm just
Leave
like, I assumed I was following you on Twitter. I'm wrong.
You're probably following a fake Ben. There's probably a Ben out there that asks for your seed phrase quite regularly. Have I been asking quite a lot for that?
No, you not yet. Well, okay, don't follow Ben anywhere. Don't message him. He's not your friend, but be grateful to him because he does good shit.
Be grateful, and please tag me in Discord when you have feedback. That's fine.
Awesome. Peace.